Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Desiree and I'm the owner and creator behind The Handmade Mom, where I create mom and positivity focused items. Now in this week's video, we are going to be switching gears from our usual small business stuff and talking about motherhood and my journey and experience through that so far. If you have not watched my very first video, which was the introduction of myself and this channel, then I will link it up top for you. But in that video, I talked about what I wanted to show you guys here on my channel. And that was not only small business, but also motherhood and how they're very much intertwined for me in my life. Because honestly, I would not be in small business if it was not for becoming a mom. So they're both really important to me. And honestly, I'm in pretty much the same phase, the same stage, I guess, in both. Because if you have not watched my video where I talk about my small business journey from start to where I'm at now, I will also link that up top for you guys. But in that video, I told you guys that I pretty much started my small business when my daughter was, I think officially started, I think it was like 3 months, if I remember correctly. But I go over all the details in the timeline in that video. So yeah, my small business is pretty much the same age as my daughter. And so I am still in the infancy learning phases with that, and same thing with motherhood. So doing it at the same time is definitely a challenge, but I am here to show you guys that you guys are not alone if you are going through the same thing or something similar, or if you've already been through this stage and maybe you're farther along in either one of your journeys. But yeah, so I figured to start off the motherhood talk, we would start with my birth story with my daughter. So if you are interested in hearing that, and my experience with an ECV and her being in a transverse lying position and my experience with the C-section, then keep on watching. Okay, so I just want to pop on real quick and give a quick trigger warning. In the beginning of my birth story, I do mention miscarriage. So just a heads up, if you are not in the space to be able to talk about that, feel free to skip ahead. So we found out we were pregnant in November of 2020. And it was a week after our wedding. So it was super exciting, not gonna lie. We were actively trying to start a family, but it was also very scary, shocking, and surprising for a few reasons. So one, going into the process of starting a family, my whole life I had already kind of set in my mind that it was going to be really hard for me to get pregnant, and all of that, because when I was born with what's called gastroschisis. So basically that means when my abdomen was forming, it did not close all the way. So when I was born, everything that was inside in my abdomen area came out and had to be put back in. And I didn't know if this would have any effect on my reproductive system or anything like that. And anytime I asked doctors, growing up, they would never be able to give me a true answer. It was always like, well, maybe, but we don't know. So that was one reason that it was shocking and surprising. And then the second reason was actually in October, so the month before, October of 2020, we had found out that we were pregnant for the first time. We were so excited. We had this big whole plan of how we were going to tell our family and friends at the wedding on the night of my bachelorette. Unfortunately, I ended up miscarrying. I had a early miscarriage, and it was really tough. I didn't even make it to my first appointment. So yeah, that was not a fun time. Honestly, the miscarriage really impacted a lot. I went through it by myself, essentially, because nobody in our family knew that we were pregnant at the time. Like I said, we hadn't told anybody. We were planning on telling everybody at the wedding. So I went through that pretty much alone, and it was really, really tough to go through, and it really impacted me from that point on. I thought that, well, I already came into this process thinking that it was going to be hard for me to get pregnant, and here basically is the proof of that. Which, although I went into the process thinking that, it was going to be hard for me to get pregnant, I never thought, and I never, expected to experience a miscarriage. It was one of those things that I had heard about, I had knew about, kind of, sort of, but I never really thought that it would happen to me. And when it did, it was like a ton of bricks. So once I had that experience, it definitely impacted when we found out we were pregnant again in November, because I was not thinking that it was going to happen. I had heard many stories of people who had miscarriage and then it took them a few months before they got pregnant again. So yeah, I was really, really shocked that we were pregnant again. And then on top of that, now I was super duper nervous and super duper paranoid about everything. Every time I went to the bathroom, I was constantly checking because I was afraid that we were going to lose that baby too. But fortunately, we did not. Everything was great, and we ended up with a happy, healthy, beautiful baby girl. But yeah, so that's why it was super shocking for us to find out that we were pregnant a week after the wedding. Now, as far as the actual pregnancy itself goes, it was actually a pretty smooth pregnancy, other than being, nervous about miscarriage again, and pretty much the entirety of the pregnancy. I had a pretty smooth pregnancy. My first trimester was pretty calm. I didn't really have too much morning sickness. I still had a good amount of energy and I was feeling pretty good. The second trimester, same thing, was doing really, really well. I think the only thing that I had to deal with was like a super strong craving for potatoes. Honestly, even going into the third trimester, like it was pretty smooth. I was feeling really good. Somewhere within that time frame of 28 to 32 weeks is when we did find out though that she was in a different position. So normally when you get towards the end of a pregnancy, the baby starts to move into the head down position because oh, time to get ready to be born. And they kind of start doing that process. So somewhere between 28 and 32 weeks, we found out that she had been in what's called a transverse lying position. And basically that just means that she was laying sideways. Usually babies are either head down or they are what's called breech, which is butt or feet down. But she was neither. She was fully sideways. Now, throughout the entire pregnancy, every scan that we had done was always like that. She was always sideways. She was always in this position. Now, granted, also when they're little bitty, they can move around and flip around a lot. It was closer. It was definitely closer to when they're starting to run out of space and it's getting a little snug in there. That is when we started to really kind of get concerned that she was still sideways and hadn't shifted to the head down position yet. So we did have that. That was really the only thing that we were having to manage and deal with at the end of the pregnancy. And pretty much what we did is we did a couple things. So first we did some exercises from Spinning Babies that my doctor recommended. And if you don't know what Spinning Babies is, it's basically just some simple exercises that you can do that help to open up your pelvic bone to allow for some more space for baby to maneuver themselves and then hopefully encourage them to move into that head down position. You see it used a lot and comes up a lot for breech babies, but it can also be used for transverse babies, and then there's other things as well that Spinning Babies techniques can be used for. So I did a lot of that. I was upside down quite a bit, and I was doing all these exercises every day, multiple times a day. So yeah, that was a journey in and of itself. But we did that and it actually kind of worked. So she did turn, but she actually turned into the breech position. So again, that was her butt was down and her head was up. So that wasn't ideal. We needed her to be head down in order to have a vaginal delivery, which is what I was wanting. That was what my goal was to have a vaginal birth. So she went breech. We continued doing exercises throughout pretty much the day before we had her, I did all my exercises, and just trying and hoping that I could get her to turn. I even did, what's it called? I'm drawing a hypnobirthing. I even did hypnobirthing, trying to visualize her turning, trying to put that out there and try to get her to be on the same wavelength with me. I don't know. And she was determined to stay where she was. So the final thing that we tried to get her to turn, which my doctor recommended and we had a very lengthy discussion about, was doing what's called an ECV, or an external cephalic version. You may also hear it called as just a version. And essentially what that is the doctor or the OB will try to turn the baby manually from the outside, by pressing and pushing on your belly to get them to turn. So we did go through that. Now that experience was definitely one that I had never heard of before. I had never known anybody who had been through that. So when it came up as an option for me, I really didn't know what to think or what to do, because I had no idea about it. So of course I went home and did a lot of research and tried to find as much information as I could, and made the best informed decision for myself and my baby at the time. Now if you look it up, if you look up external cephalic versions, you can find videos out on YouTube where they show what their ECV procedure looked like. It's not a lengthy procedure. It's pretty short, honestly. But essentially what they do is there is a nurse, or there's a sonographer, and there is the OB. And what they'll do is they will push, so the OB will push onto the baby and the belly and try to get them to turn, and then they stop. The sonographer goes in and checks the baby's heart rate, and as long as everything is looking okay, then they continue on. And this is done because it can cause distress to the baby if the baby is not liking trying to be turned. It's also likely that you could go into an emergency C-section because of the baby not liking it, could cause heart rates to drop and things like that. So when this procedure is done, it's done at a place where you can quickly get into an emergency C-section. So yeah, there is definitely risk to it, which were hard to talk about and consider when we were making this decision. But ultimately, after all the discussions with my husband and my OB, we ended up going with it and we ended up trying it. I wholeheartedly trust my OB and knew that she was going to have my best interest and my baby's best interest at heart. So yeah, we went for it. And unfortunately, it was not successful. I would definitely say that it was uncomfortable for sure. It wasn't painful. There was only one part that I can remember that was painful, which was when my OB was trying to get Lala out of my pelvic bone. She pretty much had to put a lot of pressure on my pelvic bone to kind of up and get her out, essentially. That was probably the part that was most painful. But otherwise, the rest of it was just uncomfortable. Trying to breathe through it was really hard because it was hard enough with her pressing on my belly to just naturally breathe, let alone trying to breathe, well and keep myself calm. So yeah, that was my experience with an ECV. Like I said, overall, it just wasn't successful, which I knew that was a big possibility going in because first-time moms tend to have a lower success rate just because things basically are not elastic enough. They're still pretty firm because it's the first time that we're being stretched out from pregnancy. So yeah, that does play a factor into things, and that's why first-time moms tend to not have successful ECVs. So yeah, so that was my experience with that. Because that wasn't successful, we had already made the decision that we were going to just go into a C-section. So pretty much what happened was we scheduled my C-section, and when we went in for the C-section, we were going to be trying the ECV first. And then if it didn't work, then we were going to just continue on that day with the C-section. If it did work, then we were going to be sent home and continue on the route for a vaginal birth. But because it was not successful, we ended up staying and having my daughter that evening via C-section. So it was very difficult. I'm not going to lie. It was very difficult to have that C-section because in my mind and in my heart, I thought wholeheartedly that I was going to be able to do this and I was going to be able to have the vaginal birth that I wanted. And I went into that experience, I went into that hospital thinking that I was going to be leaving later on in order to have a vaginal birth. I had in the very, very, very back of my mind that I would be staying for a C-section because I knew that that was the possibility, but I just really believed and really thought that I wouldn't go down that path. So when it ultimately came down to, yep, we're having a C-section, and we're having it today, it was really difficult. It was really difficult to cope with. Because then pretty much from then on, so once the ECV was done and it was deemed that we were not going to be able to turn her and we were going to continue with the C-section route, we ended up kind of hanging out in the triage area for quite a while, for most of the day. And it wasn't until the late afternoon time that we went back for our C-section. So we pretty much just tried to get ready and prepared for baby girl to come and make her entrance into the world. I had a lot of work to do mentally because there was a variety of reasons that I didn't want a C-section. And one of those reasons, now this is not the main reason, but one of those reasons is I have a huge, huge fear of needles. Like, I don't like getting shots. I don't like needles poking me. I don't have any tattoos for that specific reason. So I knew that going into a C-section, I would have to have an epidural. And that was one of the biggest things for me, is I really did not want an epidural. Simply for the fact of, I did not want that huge needle going into me. And I now had to mentally prepare for that to happen. And on top of that, had to prepare for that to happen solo because my husband could not be in the OR with me as they were prepping me and getting me ready. They brought him in afterwards. So that pretty much that whole time in triage was a lot of like mental preparation for that, and for, you know, the actual C-section itself, and then for, you know, having her here later in the day. Like, it was just kind of mentally preparing for all of those things. So that was that. So this is Future Desiree. I am currently editing the video, and I realized that I completely forgot to mention a big part of something that I had to prepare for mentally between the time of finding out we were having a C-section and going back to the OR. One of the big things that I really had to work on mentally was being okay with the fact that I was having a C-section now. Like I mentioned, I was so set on my goal was having a vaginal birth that I thought that that's what was going to be the outcome from this ECV. And when it wasn't the case, I had been trying so much for so long, so many exercises every day, multiple times a day. It was so hard. And in that moment, I felt like a failure. I felt like I did everything I possibly could, and it just didn't work. It just failed. I failed. I had a really hard time with that. I felt like I had done all this work for nothing. So that was something else that I really had to mentally prepare for going into this C-section. So there was a lot happening, mostly mentally for me. But yeah, that was a big one. Now coming out of it, and 2 years later, I realized that, you know, I wasn't a failure, and it was the way that it was supposed to be. I was supposed to have a C-section for whatever reason. But regardless, in the moment, that's what I had felt, and that's something that I had to work through. So I just felt like I should add that in there. Yeah, let's keep on going. And then once we were set and ready to go, they called us back. They took me into the OR and started prepping me, started getting me ready. I had absolutely wonderful nurses. Just thinking back to like having to get my epidural, I was so terrified, and I had this sweet nurse who would let me like just hold her, and pretty much like if you've ever had an epidural or if you've seen an epidural being given, like you know that you have to like really arch your back. And I was so afraid, and she was talking me through the whole thing, and she was like right in my ear, just calmly talking to me, and I'm sitting there and I'm literally, not even kidding you, I'm like shaking so hard. And then it comes a point in time with the epidural where you can't move. You can't move at all because it, I guess, could cause it to be poked in the wrong spot. I don't know, but you can't move. And I was so afraid. And when that time came, I pretty much just squeezed the life out of that nurse. So I felt so bad, but she did not even flinch. She did not even skip a beat. She just kept talking very sweetly to me, walked me through the whole thing. And yeah, it was not a fun experience, but I was glad that I had the nurses that I had. So anyways, once we get through all that, they finish prepping me the rest of the way. They get me laid down, and we're getting ready to go. You know, everybody's talking, checking in with things, and they bring in my husband. And then I'm sitting there, and you know, now at this point, my husband and I are talking. All right, here it comes. Like, we're getting ready for this. My OB does ask if I can feel what she's doing, as far as like, I guess she was pinching with some tool, just to make sure that I was not feeling anything, because we don't want that. And I was like, nope, don't feel anything. So then they keep going about their way, and my husband and I are still just talking. And next thing I know, which I didn't know, I did not realize that they had already started the process. I didn't know. I thought they were still prepping things. I thought they were still getting things ready. But then the next thing I know after that is I hear my OB say, "Oh, I see a foot." And I remember thinking to myself, like, a foot? Like, how do you see a foot? Like, what do you mean you see a foot? Like, how do you see something because you haven't even started yet? So yeah, that was a big shock, because I was like, oh, it's happening. Oh, she's coming right now. So then get her out and get her, you know, I see her, I can hear her crying. And so then I start crying, and it's a whole thing, right? And then, you know, the usual hustle and bustle of C-section. She gets cleaned off, weighed, all that stuff, then brought over to me. We do skin to skin, the whole thing. And it was great. It was really, really great in that moment. Now I still wish that I could have had the vaginal birth that I wanted. And there was definitely things from that C-section experience that impacted me in my postpartum. But overall, it was good. I had a good experience. I did not have anything, you know, happen where there was any kind of scare or anything like that. So overall, it was a good experience for a C-section. So yeah, had a C-section, had her. We went back to our room, or I think we went to one room first, where it's like they observe and they watch and make sure that I'm okay, baby's okay, for however long, and then we got moved to our room. I just remember I kind of am a little bit fuzzy on like this part, because I was so out of it. But like, I remember being in the observation room, I guess, and they were asking me if I wanted to hold Lala, and I did. I wanted to hold her, but I felt so tired that literally them asking me, I couldn't even get through the question without falling asleep. So tired. And I was like, I can't, I don't want to hold her and drop her. I'm too afraid to drop her. I'm not ready to hold her yet. And then I remember seeing my husband holding her in the chair, and then I just was out. And it took me a really long time to like get fully like back into awareness of things and not be so groggy and sleepy. Then we moved to our actual postpartum room, which at this time it was still pretty like heavy with the COVID policies. They had started to lift some, but then they would like flip back, and then it would kind of ease up, and then it would flip back. So actually right before we went into the hospital, they had the policy where we could have our significant other, and then we could also have one additional person with us, which was supposed to be my mom. And then literally the day before, I had to go in to do some paperwork and some other stuff beforehand. And that day they changed the policy back to what it was, where it was just the spouse. So it was just my husband and I. It was just the two of us with this brand new baby and not knowing what to do. And I was so tired. I was trying to do all these things by ourselves while we were so tired. We had been at the hospital all day, and we were just exhausted. And now we have this little bitty baby that is crying, you know, every few hours, and we're like, what do you need? So yeah, but from then on, it was really great that we now had her, and we were now in this new stage of our lives. And yeah, the first few days in the hospital were up and down. The first day was pretty smooth. She latched on really, really well, and I was super excited about that. The second night that she was born, or the second night that she was here earthside, was probably the roughest night. She got to a point where she would just like scream and cry, and nothing I did, like, I knew she was hungry, or at least I thought she was hungry. And like I could not get her to latch. I could not get her to calm down enough to even latch. And she just screamed crying, like to the point where we had to have a nurse come and, you know, take her out of the room for a little bit and then bring her back, because I was so overwhelmed. I was so like, oh my gosh, and didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to help her, and felt like I was failing already. But the nurse, luckily, I thought it was because I had not fed her for a little while. I had been trying to get her to latch, and she just wasn't latching well. And so I thought, you know, she was hungry, and I was at the point where I was like, I didn't want to give formula. I was trying my hardest to just breastfeed, and I was at the point at that moment, like, just give her formula. I don't care. Like, I just need her to eat. Like, I know she's hungry. And again, I had such sweet nurses that they knew, they could tell where, you know, I was at, and, you know, they didn't automatically be like, all right, and then give her formula. They were just like, you know what, how about we try this? And that's when they took her for a little bit. She calmed down. I got to sleep for a little bit. Then they brought her back, and we were all great after that. So yeah, there were some things that had little bits of hiccups that we weren't expecting. Like her being, you know, sideways, and the ECV and that not being successful, and, you know, those kinds of things. But overall, I had a pretty good birth experience. So yeah, I learned a lot. Definitely took a lot of the things that I experienced and the things that I learned from not only the pregnancy, but the birth itself, and the C-section, and applied it to the twins and their birth, because I did have them be a C-section as well. So I will do a whole separate video on their birth story here probably soon. So be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification, so that way when I do post that video about the twins' birth, then you'll be notified that I have done so. But yeah, overall, we had a really great experience. So I think I'm going to end the video here. I pretty much got the gist of her birth story. I probably miss a few details here and there. Like I said, she's 2 now, so it's been a couple years, and I probably forgot a few small things here and there. But the basic overall gist is there, and the main points are there. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you did, please feel free to give this video a big thumbs up. It really, really helps me out, and it helps get my videos out to other people to see as well. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.